Hello, everybody. We're so happy to have you here today. Welcome to our Ask the Expert series. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome and thank you for joining us. Criterion Edge runs multiple informative webinars throughout the year. For today's live question and answer topic, we'll be discussing safety and performance measures and acceptance criteria. Our presenter today is Lori Mitchell, founder and president of Criterion Edge, a global medical and regulatory writing and safety services firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety and pharmacovigilance management, and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory and medical writing solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, she is a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is also a published author and holds a Master of Nursing from UCLA. Now I'll welcome Lori to give an overview of today's session.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. I hope we have a very good and interactive session today. I'm sure we will. We can get started. Let's see, are we on the right? There we go. I couldn't see the question. I was needing to read the slides and I couldn't see the questions. So please send in your questions on how to identify meaningful safety and performance endpoints or measures or objectives are used by several different names. Send in your questions about how to demonstrate the safety and performance objectives are appropriate and clinically relevant to your subject device. And then how to specify and identify acceptance criteria that will help support the S&P objectives and your benefit risk profile.
So we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. Lori, can you see the question on your screen?
I can.
Okay, great. Our first question is, how do we know which safety and performance requirements are applicable for a subject device?
So that's a great question and a great place to start, actually. If you're, the first place to look is internally. If you're a company that has run clinical investigations on your device or devices, then look to your endpoints first in your clinical investigations. Look internally. What endpoints have you used in the past? Clearly, those endpoints are what your data are rotate around. And then look also at your benefit risk profiles, your PMS data. What kind of questions, what kind of PMS data are you receiving? All manufacturer held data is the strongest data on your subject device there is, and manufacturer held versus published data. So look internally is my first piece of advice for that. Other places to look, or make sure that your safety and performance objectives align with, professional guidelines. Are they common to your industry? In other words, will your competitors be reporting data on their devices using basically those same safety and performance objectives? So if you get too esoteric on those, you may be out of alignment or out of sync with your competitor reported data, which you're going to need to establish acceptance criteria.
Great, thank you for that. Here is our next question. What are the current methods for choosing the acceptance criteria?
Well, first of all, I would note that acceptance criteria are not chosen in that they're not deliberately cherry-picked or picked. The general rule of thumb is that you have established your safety and performance objectives for your subject device. That would be also applicable to your identified competitor devices, that identified as in identified in your CER eventually. And then you go out to you do a competitor device search of those competitor devices, looking for this data that they've reported in published literature using on those same safety and performance measures or endpoints or objectives. And you would extract that data from all of the competitor device published literature that you would find in a competitor device search. That's the methodology. And the notified body will look very carefully at that methodology, because the competitor devices that you choose and the safety and performance objectives that are identified, they will want to make sure that your competitor device search is methodologically robust, that you have chosen the correct and the appropriate and relevant competitor devices, and fully extracted those acceptance criteria on the same safety and performance objectives you've identified for your subject device. In other words, this is all a conversation about they don't want to see any hint of bias when identifying and extracting those acceptance criteria on your competitor devices.
All right, thank you. Here's our next question. What if the subject device data do not meet one or more safety and performance acceptance criteria?
Well, that is a question, because you don't know that right at the beginning. You can't know that until you get to the end of your clinical evaluation report, which is where you are pulling it all together, and you're now looking at your own clinical data and your all data sets on your subject device, PMS, your own internal clinical investigation data, published data, PMCF data if you have it. All of those data sets that are presented in the CER on your subject device have to be then evaluated back against those acceptance criteria for those safety and performance objectives that you established in the state-of-the-art section. And then, so what if your data does not measure up? I think is what the intent of the question is. It doesn't measure up. It doesn't pass the bar. You'll have to justify what that, it's a justification. You will need to write a justification for that, and then it very well may get pushed back by the notified body if they are uncomfortable, or they would want you to provide more data. That is a risk, and there's no easy or foolproof way of mitigating that if you're concerned about that. At the end of the day, choose your safety and performance objectives wisely, do your homework, and see what your competitors are, what their data is. Do a pilot search on your competitor data if you're worried about that. What are they reporting? What rates are they reporting? And look against your own data to see if you're going to run into that problem. But that is a real issue, and the notified body may come back and ask you for further justification. I'll just take a moment to say that, because we sometimes are asked, we are a focused service provider of regulatory writing services, and we very much primarily focus on the clinical evaluation, and then in the IVD space, the performance evaluation process. It is it is an iterative process back and forth. We're sometimes asked by new clients, what if the notified body comes back and asks us questions? Does that ever happen? And I say, in our experience, it happens 100% of the time. So that doesn't mean a bad thing. It just means they will give you the opportunity to clarify, justify, and so it's an iterative process. And this is one of the questions they may ask.
Yeah, that was some great advice. Here's our next question. Are the safety and performance measures and criteria required to be listed within the CDP or within the CEP?
We commonly do the CDP, for safety and performance objectives. Well, so here's the deal with the CDP. It's a relatively new document in-house in the with some clients that we work with, and it still may be underdeveloped or in the process of being developed. That being said, it would be ideal for safety and performance objectives to be established early on in the clinical development plan for that particular device, of course, because then, so that early identification of relevant safety and performance objectives used for that subject device, then that filters throughput all the way through your quality management system. What are your PMCF? Then what are your PMCF questions that you're asking? Are they going to support the safety and performance objectives? What about PMS data? All of your manufacturer held data should align with or feed back into and support your safety and performance objectives. So that's a very, very good question, and one that you should be looking at internally to make sure that you're talking the same language. Those safety and performance objectives show up in all of your data sets. Now, with regards to the CEP, yes, commonly, when we write CEPs for our clients, they are displayed in the CEP.
All right, thank you, Lori. Here's our next question. Would you agree that acceptance criteria are derived from the state of the art? How about devices for which no studies exist or no competitor data is available?
So yes, to the first question, would you agree that acceptance criteria are derived from the state of the art process using competitor data? Yes, that's absolutely where acceptance criteria come from, relevant competitors and relevant competitor data. But how about devices for which no studies exist? So now I think we're talking about how about devices, subject devices, your device now, for which no studies exist. So that's again your own device and maybe your competitive landscape as well. In other words, this is a common question with regards to accessories or instruments, and we may get more questions on those as well. But it is more difficult to establish that, and you may need to get very creative about the type of data that you pull. For example, and if you've ever listened to my webinars before, I apologize because I've used this analogy before. But let's take, I take always the analogy of a guide wire. That's part of a procedure. Yes, that's a medical device. Yes, it has to have its own safety and performance objectives. And yes, you have to establish acceptance criteria from the competitive landscape. But nobody, and I mean nobody, writes specifically about cardiac guide wires or any guide wire for that matter, and many, many other instruments, accessories, and so forth. So one tact that we have always taken with those types of device is to use for a performance objective. And it's important to note that you don't need many safety and many performance objectives. You don't need to do that. More is not better. We have written CERs where there is one safety objective and one performance objective. And often it is with devices such as this. So for example, what would be a performance objective for a device that's used in a procedure? Procedural success, for example, would be one that we would use for a guide wire. In other words, it can be inferred and it must be justified, your thinking, in other words, your rationale in your CER of why a surrogate endpoint such as procedural success would be relevant to the performance of a device that is used within that procedure. And safety would also be the reporting of any failure of the procedure that would be safety relevant, such as bleeding or rates of bleeding or anything like that, that could be inferred back to your more simple device. And I know there are orthopedic people out there wondering about screws and plates and these simple devices. I mean, I'm sure there's many of you out there that have the same issue. And And it is a creative process, but it is successful. We have used it many times with justification.
Great, thank you, Lori. Here's our next question about competitor searches. Should they be broad or narrow?
Well, I think that depends on the expected availability of the data and the number of relevant competitor devices. So they do not need to be broad, but they need to be relevant. So our advice to our on the CERs that we've written when we're talking about what competitors, we ask when we engage with our clients in our scoping meetings up front, we say, please identify your relevant competitors. And we don't ask for a list of 12. We're really asking for the most relevant, and that number can be 1 or 2, or it can be 4 or 5, and it's usually not much broader than that. Pick your most relevant competitors if you have many to pick from, and especially ones that there's published data on and that you can extract, and that there is justification with regards to that they really are relevant. They would use the same patient contacting materials, same indications for use, similar technology, design technology and such. That's what the notified body is looking for.
All right. Here is our next question. How do you weigh the data from a case report?
So case reports, when we first started doing CERs in 2017, very early in 2017, case reports were people were nervous about them, using them at all. But again, let's go back to our humble friends of accessories, guide wires, plates and screws, instruments, things like that. Again, nobody writes about those things, those devices. And we started casting our net very early in 2017, even to case studies and case reports, which is the lowest level of evidence. So I'll spend a moment talking about weighting and appraisal of all data sets and all evidence. You should use a validated tool, GHTF, other tools that are relevant to the MDR or IVDR regulations. And for weighting of evidence, you weight all data sets. If it's a low level of evidence, which evidence taken from case studies are, it doesn't matter if that's all you have. So the notified body is going to come along and look at your methodology, and it's going to be published for your searches and selection of this relevant data in your competitors or your subject device. And they're going to see by your methodology and your screening and your inclusion and exclusion criteria, they're going to see that you have a methodologically robust systematic literature review, and you have looked appropriately for the highest levels of evidence on your device. If that high level of evidence is not available, you may use lower levels of evidence in lieu of the availability of higher levels. You just must wait and appraise it and show that you have turned over every rock and you have done an appropriate job of documenting your systematic literature review. So don't despair if you have low levels of evidence of your data is my message. If that's all you have, the notified bodies accept that. What they wouldn't accept is that if they felt like there probably was higher levels of evidence and you were ignoring it, or somehow you were biased against it and you didn't choose it, that will get their attention and they'll push back on that. But if it's all you've got, it's okay.
All right, thank you. Moving on to our next question. For legacy devices with no new or novel features or changes to the intended use, can you tell us what would trigger a new clinical evaluation?
Well, I'm not sure what's meant by a new clinical evaluation. So obviously, if these are already approved devices that have CE mark, they would have had by now at least an MDD CER performed, and that assuming that CE mark, the maintenance of the CE mark certificate is intended, that MDD CER would need to be revved up and updated to MDR standards. Obviously, we all know that. So if this is a question then instead about the frequency of the clinical evaluation, which must be justified and documented in your CER against MDR standards, is that you would, if this is a frequency question with no new or novel features or changes to the intended use, well, that could be for many devices. What would trigger a new clinical evaluation? It's not so much a new clinical evaluation, it would be your ongoing clinical evaluation at the frequency, annual, every 2 years, whatever your device is, whatever class of device it is, and whatever is justified in your CER, you must then conduct a clinical evaluation according to that justification of the frequency. So I hope that helped answer that question.
Great, thank you. Here's our next question. What are the biggest pitfalls or Achilles heels to watch out for in identifying safety and performance measures?
Well, I'll start with something I think a couple of things that I've already mentioned is that you don't need many. One pitfall or one, mistake that not a mistake, but it's like a desire from some of our new clients to say, well, we must have 2 or 3 or 4 of each, and what are they going to be, and what are we going to do, and how do we identify them? Criterion Edge actually engages in a sort of a consultation service if the company really has not tackled, our client hasn't really tackled the safety and performance objectives identification, because it really is a very iterative process, and we can sometimes be helpful to advise with what works in a CER. So one of the things that we note is that the clients try to choose too many. It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be all inclusive. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list at all. Again, I mentioned earlier, we've written CERs with 1 of each. So commonly, I would say if it's 2 or 3 in each category, it's perfectly fine. In other words, look for, and again, I mentioned this earlier too, it needs to be specific to your device. Those safety and performance measures have to do 2 functions. You have to know that they're used out in the industry with your competitors, because you're going to need to go back to your competitor data to pull the acceptance criteria, their data, in other words, their safety and performance data on those same objectives. And if those objectives are very narrowly written and don't pertain to your competitors, you're going to have a hard time finding acceptance criteria. So don't do that. And another pitfall might be, or an Achilles heel might be, that the safety and performance objectives are not meaningful to the intended purpose or the population, and as I've said, and most important, there's no competitor data available. So those are some common watch outs for when you're choosing your safety and performance objectives.
Definitely, those are some great tips. Let's get to our next question. How much time should a writer allow to conduct an adequate literature search on legacy devices with limited data reported?
Well, so I'm wondering if this question is meant, what should the time range be? I could take time in 2 different ways, and maybe I'll answer it both ways. So let me first tackle it with, what should the time range of a literature search be when you're looking for data on legacy devices, published data on legacy devices, whether it's competitor or your subject device? So time range. We get this question of the search. So we get this question a lot and we have conversations a lot with our clients about how far back should we go in the time range. Now, there's sometimes our clients say, no, we need to go back all the way to the approval of the subject device. And the short answer to that is no, you don't. That no notified body requires for you to go back to the dawn of time, 2001, for when your subject device was approved and CE marked, and collect all that data, or go back that far, and certainly not back that far for the competitor device search, where you're pulling up acceptance criteria. So let's talk a little bit about that. The acceptance criteria are meant to be meaningful and relevant and on the current technology used. So yes, you may have to go back further to find some data, but technology by definition tends to evolve over the years. So the notified body may question, why did you go back 15 years looking for device data, safety and performance device data on technology that has evolved since then? So you don't need to go back. We commonly use a 5-year range, 3-year range on both safety and competitor device literature searches. So that's answering the question of how much time to go back. But the other way this question could be interpreted is like, how long does it take? How long does it take to conduct an adequate literature search on legacy devices with limited data reporting? Well, it takes us, again, choosing your time range. How long would it take to conduct the search, screen every single a reference that came back on that search, because that is the methodology that is required. And these searches, by the way, should not be conducted in PubMed on the internet. That is not robust methodology, and your notified body may ding you on that. We use a platform that has access to many databases, Embase, Medline, and has the ability for our librarians to build a proper mesh terminology, Boolean search strategy. That's the kind of methodology that the notified bodies are looking for. So that's an adequate literature search. And if it looks robust, then they're really, you would run that search. And then let's not forget that if you're doing this on the subject device, then, and certainly also on the competitor device, because you're pulling data on both the competitor device, safety and performance objectives, and the subject device, safety and performance objectives. The notified body is very interested in your screening and review and selection methodology. All of that must be justified and presented in the CER. And if you have a search that comes back with 500 hits, references, you must justify the screening and the exclusion or inclusion of every single one of those 500. And that's human eyeballs, and that takes quite a bit of time. So we can run a literature search in 2 or 3 weeks to go all the way through the screening process, review, and then the data extraction. It could be as short as 2 or 3 weeks. It could be as long as 4 or 5, depending on the number of references returned on the searches.
All right, thank you. Here's our next question, Lori. How do you determine the bounds of acceptance when literature is diverse in PICO characteristics?
Well, acceptance criteria are derived from competitor device published data. So we've talked about how you identify your on this, it's pull acceptance criteria on the safety and performance objectives of published competitor device data. So you don't determine the acceptance bounds. You are pulling, let's just say you have identified that there are 32 relevant competitor device articles that were chosen as part of your screening and review of the competitor device search. And you are going to need to build a big table that shows every safety and performance objective data, either NR for not reported or what the actual results were on each one of those 32 chosen competitor articles. So you're not determining it, but at the end of the day, you'll get a range. And then you need to justify that you're going to use the lower bound for safety or the upper bound for performance or vice versa. That is the justification that you need to present to the notified body about if the range for something ranges from 2 days to 13 days for something, that's the acceptance criteria range. What do you choose, 1 day or 13 days? What's the bar that your subject device needs to be as good or better than? And that justification also needs to be written in the CER. And we commonly do all of this this is a part of the state of the art section. So this comes at the beginning of the CER. All of this is wrapped up in the state of the art section and presented there, so that going forward from there in the CER, you're now beginning to move through your subject device data sets and you're comparing them back to what you established as state of the art in the state of the art section. So I hope that helped.
Thank you. All right, let's get to our next question. Here it is. What can be transposed to in vitro diagnostic devices for the verification of device safety and performance?
So there may be some of our IVD colleagues on the line today, and welcome. And I can tell you that very easily, virtually all of it. This is virtually the same process. And I think that you know, I'm sure from your own internal research and your regulatory colleagues advising you, is that IVDR is telling its industry to look to the MDR experience and look to MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 for guidance on the how to do this, or what the notified bodies are looking for, how to present this. Now, the IVD industry has some unique reports that are being asked for. Those are the scientific validity report, the clinical performance report, and the analytical performance report. Those are unique to IVD, but those reports feed into your performance evaluation report and are underpinned and discussed also in your performance evaluation plan. But overall, the process is extremely similar to what I'm describing here for you as well.
All right, thank you. Moving on to our next question. Can you tell us about the expected lifetime of the medical device?
So the example here is a priming solution for hemodialysis. You know, there lifetimes of medical devices. You know, we've worked quite a bit in orthopedics, and what's the lifetime of an orthopedic plate screw, femur implant, whatever it might be. And we were always, you know, we've always been told that that's to bone healing. That would be the lifetime. Here's the short answer about the expected lifetime of a medical device. We are the writers and the constructors of the clinical evaluation or the performance evaluation reports. That would be data and something that would come from you, the sponsor. We would not determine that. That would come from your technical file documentation, along with, and this is important for the writer, along with the justification of why that expected lifetime is relevant to that device. So that would be something that we would turn to our clients for to provide us that information.
Great, thank you. And we have time for just a few more questions. Our next one is, are there any minimum number of safety and performance outcome measures for whom the acceptance criteria need to be set?
So I think we've already covered that. So I will just say really quickly that, you know, I had mentioned that could be as low as 1 each. That's not ideal. And there would need to be a justification probably a fairly robust justification for that. But I think I had said earlier, there might be 2 or 3, 4 at the most for each one. And it's not uncommon to have 2 safety and 3 or 4 performance criteria, but regardless of the number. So again, don't get too overblown with the numbers that you choose, the number of acceptance measures, safety and performance measures you choose, but a justification does need to be provided for each one of those. Why are they relevant? How will they help determine the safety and performance of your subject device? That there has to be that linkage.
All right, moving on to our next question. How do you define the acceptance criteria for medical devices for post-market surveillance?
Well, of course, post-market surveillance and the data that come in for post-market surveillance are manufacturer-held data. Post-market surveillance, as we know, is commonly really just confined to safety data. So that's a subject device data set. And so just like all the data sets for the subject device, your own clinical investigation, published literature, PMS data in this case, all those data sets are going to be evaluated against the acceptance criteria, relevant acceptance criteria derived from your competitor device. So I hope that helped. Your PMS data is it's a data set. It's weighted, appraised, and evaluated against the acceptance criteria like every other subject device data set.
All right. Here's our next question. How do you separate claims from SPOs?
So claims are not safety and performance objectives. They're claims made by the manufacturer that that their device is, and I'll use words that we all know we're not supposed to use, that their device is better, faster, stronger than their subject device's data. But that's, and those are not acceptable words unless you have data to back them up, that they're better, faster, stronger, the best, any of those kinds of subjective things. So claims need to be addressed. Claims, risks, benefits, essentially, all of those are kind of the same, each a different side of the same coin. All of those issues are not issues, but that conversation happens in the risk benefit section of the CER, and it would also happen the same in the PER. And again, our templates and most templates that we work with for the CER, that RBA, that risk benefit section comes at the very end of the CER, because now you're taking all data, all analysis, and you're looping back to, this is where you as a manufacturer say, well, we claim this, or we make this claim statement about our device. Where is that claim or benefit, if you will, or even risk? Where is it documented in the data sets that we just evaluated on this clinical subject device? Where do we loop it back? We build tables in the risk benefit, and you go claim by claim, benefit by benefit, risk by risk, and you point back to the data that you looked at, where you found information about that, and then you justify whether that is a claim, a risk, a benefit. This is, for us, the risk benefit section is where the clinical evaluation lands the plane. That's where it all comes together in the risk benefit section. The conclusion section for us is, while it's lengthy and very robust, it basically says, this is what, to the notified body, this is everything that we just told you. And we're going to remind you again in the conclusion section why our device is safe and performs as intended. But the risk benefit section is where so much of the story comes together.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about the safety and performance measures and acceptance criteria for accessories. Do you have any recommendations on how to tackle these?
Well, I know that we already talked about this, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I would say that, again, it gets to that age-old question about accessories or ancillary devices and so forth. And I want to say one additional point. One of the questions that we engage with our clients is early on, let's just talk about like a complex system in which there are many parts, including what could be considered accessories to that system. One of the questions that we engage with our clients are those accessories, let's just say certain guide wires or certain instruments, are they agnostic to other systems or other devices that are not a part of this clinical evaluation? In other words, can that very particular guide wire be also used on another device or system or with software, whatever it might be? Can that guide wire be used elsewhere with another device? Then it should not be a part of, it needs to stand on its own with its own, or within a grouping, a device family on its own, in its own separate CER. But occasionally, there are accessories for a larger system that are dedicated to the subject device system, say, that's under evaluation. If they exist nowhere else and they have no other function, those accessories can be included in the CER for the larger system of which they are a part, even if they have different SKUs. But if they exist and they can be used anywhere else, you can't. It's been our experience. We are not the regulatory affairs professionals, but it's been our experience. They cannot be used in the CER. They need to stand on their own somewhere else.
All right, Lori, we're getting to the end of our session, so we'll have time for just one last question. Here it is. Does Criterion Edge use statisticians to conduct meta-analyses for safety and performance data for their clients?
So there might be two questions here. Let's talk a little bit about meta-analyses. So a meta-analyses can be used. I'm gonna take us back to acceptance criteria. Meta-analyses can be used to establish the acceptance criteria for certain. If you have your competitor devices are included in those meta-analyses, you may find large meta-analyses, pooled data, in other words, that have relevant data in there that comes from your competitor devices. And again, check internally, but we have also used, some of our clients have said it's okay to use meta-analyses in the establishment and extraction of acceptance criteria for our safety and performances, even if the device under evaluation, our device, in other words, a subject device, even if your subject device data is included in that pooled meta-analysis. We have found that to be acceptable, but that is very much an internal strategy question for you, and we will do it any way you want to. So there's that part. But now there's a calculation. There's a calculation question here. Does CE use statisticians to conduct meta-analyses for the safety and performance data? So now let's pivot that to the subject device data. And the subject device data, now you've established your S&P objectives, you've established your acceptance criteria bounds, upper and lower bounds from your competitor device data. Now, what if you've turned now to your subject device data and you are looking for all available published data on those same safety and performance objectives for your actual subject device data? What if you find some articles in which it's a good level of evidence, but there aren't calculated rates that match the rates that are calculated in your acceptance criteria. So in other words, they're giving you basically the numerator and the denominator, but they're not calculating it for you. That's basically what I'm saying. So we will engage with our clients to say, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to calculate the rates? And if so, here's the methodology we would use. Please approve, because we can do that. Or we exclude it, which is not usually an option for our clients. They want all of their subject device data included in the CER, and the notified body might fuss about that. So it's a choice. Do you want us to calculate rates, or do you want to calculate the rates and give that methodology and those rates back to us? So we can do it either way. But that's a great question. Is that occasionally the subject device data is there, but it's not calculated in a selected published article, and you would need to calculate it yourself somehow.
Thank you, Lori. I think that was a great answer, and we got through many questions today. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, and if we didn't get to your question, you can schedule your free scoping of your CER or PER. Our contact information again is consult@criterionedge.com. Thank you everyone again for joining us and for your wonderful questions. Take care and have a nice day.